running now. So with these sessions, thanks for joining us. If it's your first time, welcome. If you've been before, welcome. And what we're going to do, those of you who have been before, you'll know what the session kind of structure's like. We'll have somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes on some content. And the whole idea of the content is just to give you some ideas, start to get you thinking differently about your leadership role. And then at the second half, we'll invite you to talk in breakout rooms with each other. So you'll hopefully get to meet somebody new, have a conversation about what the content that you've heard means for you and your role. And then the third and final part of the session, we'll bring you back, share some feedback. There's a couple of things that I normally just wrap up with, and then we'll close and we'll aim to finish by 5 to 2, so that you've got 5 minutes before your 2 o'clock start. So that's the intention of this session today. So because of that, let me get cracking and not hold on any longer. So today, can you all see my screen okay? Excellent, thank you. Brilliant, thanks. So today we're talking about mastering the fundamentals of leadership. And the reason we're going into the fundamentals is because very often we'll find that they are kind of missed. And it's really common for the fundamentals of leadership to be missed. And we'll talk a bit about why that is. But the idea of this session is to give you some thinking space. I'm a big fan of thinking space. It's one of the things when I was in management roles, you're so busy actually taking time to work on your role and on the business and, work with your team rather than just kind of cracking on and going through the day-to-day activities that normally overwhelm most of us. Actually, that thinking time's really rare. So this is an opportunity that hopefully for you is a really useful space of time, 50 minutes or so, to really start to give you some clear thinking time and thinking space and share some ideas that hopefully land with you. And I'll talk about 4 key things as we go through this first 20 to 30 minutes. We'll talk about the psychological shifts that are required in order for us to move into leadership. And sometimes we make those shifts and we might drift back into our former thinking and forget how important those shifts are. So even if you know about these shifts, today could be a good reminder to you about the shifts we have to make. Second thing we'll start to talk about is building trust. And we'll link that to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and where trust kind of sits within those hierarchy of needs. Then we'll talk about 5 key responsibilities of leadership that I've worked on throughout my leadership career and kind of developed a mechanism for how to manage those five areas. And we'll talk a bit about that. And I'll give you, after today's session, you'll get a tool that if you want to use, you can use following today's session. And we'll link that to improving engagement, motivation, and performance. Then we'll go into our breakout room. So that's the plan for today's session. And that really does help you to start to get back to, mastering some of those fundamentals of leadership. If it's the first time you've seen this, it'll be useful. If you've seen similar themes like this before, think about this as an opportunity to kind of revisit and really refocus on where you might not have been as strong in the past. But coming into today, that's the plan for today's session. I'll give you a moment to just pause. And if there's something specific you joined today's call for, if there's one thing you were thinking, right, this is what I'd like to get from today's call, feel free to either drop it in the chat. Let me just get the chat started so that you know where that is. The chat is here, and it'll be on your toolbar on the LinkedIn, on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom. There's a little button, probably second or third to the left, which says chat. So that's the chat. Just if there's one thing you're looking to get from today's session, you might be looking for a refresh, you might be looking to kind of learn some new stuff, but there might also be one thing where you go, I've got a specific thing that I'd like to get from today's session. If there's one thing, just drop it in the chat and I'll aim to cover it. If not during the session, then certainly during the Q&A at the end. So just capture that. If there is one thing, just put it in the chat and I'll read it out. Lizzie's just said apologies. She said she's jumped on a call for now, but she'll be back with us. No problem. Thanks, Lizzie. Himesh says, how to get the quiet ones to speak up more in a group meeting. Okay, thanks, Himesh. We'll definitely look at that today. And that is something that I'm sure you can all relate to, especially if you've got, a couple of dominant people in your teams who are always the ones that speak up. Sometimes it can be difficult to get opinion and, input and ideas from people who are perhaps a little more reserved or a little quieter, or even some people that find it easier just to sit and listen, and that's part of what we will talk a bit about that today, because I think I've got some ideas that might be useful for you. Thanks, Himesh. That's great. And if there's anything else that's specific on your mind, then feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go through today's session. So just a couple of ideas. Oh, Andy, thanks, Andy. How to reconnect trust after letting them down. Okay. Thanks, Andy. That's interesting, especially if sometimes as managers in businesses, teams are let down. It's not always something we can control. Sometimes they're let down by the organization or let down by other, external influences. Sometimes it's us, right? Sometimes we might have let them down. So, okay, thanks, Andy. We'll have a look at that. I might tease out a specific example from you, Andy, when we get to the Q&A, if that's all right, if you're willing to share that. Okay, good. We've got a couple of areas there, but if there's anything else specific for you, then do let me know. Okay. So let's talk a bit about today's session. So when I first was promoted to a manager's position, I was one of the 39%. Sorry, I was one of the 61% who received no training. I wasn't one of the 39% who does receive training. I was promoted into a management position, and then I had no formal training. In fact, it was a sales manager's position, and the sales manager I worked for was a lovely guy, the kind of guy that you want to be friends with, but not the kind of person that you want to be your manager, because he was completely ineffective. He was the loveliest guy, but avoided any form of confrontation, avoided all of the necessary conversations that need to be had by leaders, and in fact had a team that were, borderline dysfunctional because of his leadership style. And then I stepped in to become his number two as a sales manager, thinking it was a great opportunity, and started to try and put in place what I thought was some management measures. On reflection, looking back, realized it was a bit too much too soon, and had a really difficult experience. And then you'll see that 65% of people receive no ongoing management training. So you might get, and this, interestingly, the second time I went into management, I went on a management training course, which I think was a 2-day course. And then I was left adrift for about 6 months. So this is quite usual that we go into those management positions, either don't get development, or don't get development and don't get any ongoing development. And that really does hinder us, because there are so many issues around moving into leadership positions. I'm sure you've found this for yourself, but there's a great quote by a guy called Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is a very well-known leadership coach and trainer in the US. And he's got this mantra that talks about what got you here won't get you there, and specifically related to leadership. And what he says, and what I've discovered personally myself, having been through this journey multiple times, is that the things that make you successful as an individual contributor in a business are very often the same things that hinder you as a manager. So you've got this pool of talent within the business. The person who's performing at the highest level, generally speaking, will be the person that gets promoted to management or leadership. And then because they're not given the direction or the training on how to make that change into leadership, they do more of what they were doing as an individual contributor, and they find that actually it doesn't work. And then this frustration builds. And that's the experience I've had, not only personally, but I've had it managing people, and I've had it coaching people and clients that I work with. So we're going to start to talk about some of the changes that we can make that will help us to think about what is it that we need to be successful as a manager versus what is it that made us successful as individual contributors, as the term goes within larger organizations. And I always think there are 2 psychological shifts that we have to make when we move into leadership. So the first psychological shift is that as an individual contributor, it's all about your effort. Everything you do determines how successful you are in your role within your business. Okay, so you are the main driver of your results. And then, of course, we get into a leadership position, and no matter how big your team, even if you've only got a couple of direct reports, okay. My first move, I went to a team of 7. So I went from me to 7. And you've only got to think about it logically. There's absolutely no way one person can work hard enough to deliver the results of 7 people. It just is not possible. So the first important shift we have to make this shift. And that shift is from me delivering the results to recognizing that I now become the facilitator of a team's results. Okay, my sole purpose as a manager, as a leader, is I now have to be able to deliver results through a team. And it sounds like such an obvious and simple shift, but it's one that many managers and leaders fail to recognize, or just for some reason have this kind of real resistance to making that change. And we'll talk a bit about why that is. And not only resistance, but sometimes it just isn't obvious. We we kind of work really hard. We're pushing and pushing and pushing, and we don't realize that actually what we need to do is pivot from over-reliance on ourselves to get things done to really focusing on a team that can deliver results through us as leaders and managers and coaches. And then the second shift that I felt was really important was the shift from, and I like to think of it as getting off the dopamine treadmill. What does that mean? What it means is that when we complete tasks, when we do stuff, when we deliver a performance outcome, we get a hit of dopamine, right? It's like this satisfaction, an internal chemical that our brain releases when you complete something that makes you go, feel good about doing that, okay? We don't get as much of that dopamine when we're in leadership because we don't have the same level of task completion. We have to move from short-term thinking, getting personal satisfaction from either being rewarded or told we've done a good job or completing tasks. We have to make this shift to start to think about, okay, what's the legacy that I can create as a leader for this business and this team? And how do I help this team to become the very best they can be through a series of ongoing discussions with them as their leader? And that immediately moves us from short-term dopamine satisfaction to long-term strategically thinking about how to gain success. And sometimes that might mean you go weeks without somebody saying, "Great job, Justin." Or you go weeks on a task or a project where you don't see the progress until you start to hit certain milestones. And that can cause cognitive dissonance in our minds when we're so used to lots of short-term wins and successes and great feedback to this kind of desert, this desert that sometimes appears, where it's all about how we keep ourselves motivated. And that shift is so important for us to make, because, and I've seen this lots of times with new managers I work with, where they just start to feel a bit demotivated, and the demotivation is coming from the lack of feedback or the lack of even personal feedback. I've completed this task, I feel good about it, to actually I've set this person a task, I haven't heard from them, I haven't followed up with them, they haven't circled back with me, and now I feel a bit of a drift, or I feel a bit like things are going off track. And we have to make that shift in our thinking. So two shifts that are really important. And then this will link to Andy's point. Once we get those two shifts in place, and this, I don't think, the analogy of the light switch is probably a poor one, because you'll have to keep going back and reminding yourself of these things, especially when you're new to leadership. And actually, when you're established, keep reminding yourself that it's about the team, it's about their efforts, it's about the long-term improvements of performance that we can help them to deliver. And then once we've got those shifts in place, we start to change our thinking. Then we have to start to think about, okay, what is it that our team need from us in order to perform? And the first thing that we really need to think about is a couple of points, but one I want to pick up on is this importance of trust. And I love this Simon Sinek quote, which says, when leaders are willing to prioritize trust over performance, especially when people need some support to start to get the foundations in place, then performance almost always follows. We get the trust right, then performance will follow. And very often that's about us as leaders being able to establish that trust and then get clarity over what good performance looks like, and helping our teams to deliver. So it's really, really leadership based. And it's not just Simon Sinek's quote, but I really like the stats on trust and leadership. So lots of research in this area. ADP Research Institute found that trust in the leader is the foundation of engagement. So employees 12 times more likely to be engaged in their work and their business if they trust their leaders. So 12 times more likely to be engaged if they trust the leader. DDI Group found that those employees that are engaged, higher engaged employees, are 4 times less likely to leave the employer in their businesses if they've got these levels of high engagement and connection with the leader. And we've all heard the quote, we join companies, we leave managers. And I've certainly found that to be my experience throughout my career as well. And then, of course, there's a direct Aon research showed that there's a direct correlation between employee engagement. So we've got leadership engagement, between employee engagement and then client and customer satisfaction scores. So higher engaged employees deliver 4 times the level of client satisfaction of that of lower engaged employees. And we can all relate to that in our own businesses with the people that we work with. And those companies with highly engaged employees, if you look at the data, Hay Group show that they generate 2.5 times more revenue compared to those companies with lower employee engagement scores. So employee engagement scores and revenue results from companies operating in the same sector, 2.5 times higher, the direct correlation between employee engagement and the results of the company. And then finally, I'm a big fan of coaching as a leadership style, as many of you will know. And a lot of time within businesses as managers and leaders, we are trying to inspire change and changes in performance. And if you look at coaching as a leadership style versus direct management, i.e. telling people what to do rather than coaching them on how they can deliver, coaching improves change management and delivery of results by 3.5 times more than just using a directive management approach. It's not to say you don't have to use directive management sometimes. We have to have leadership and behavioral flexibility, but where we have people that can deliver and are performing, we should be coaching them, not directively telling them what to do and managing. So trust is really, really important. And then I talked a bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I remember when I first learned this, I'd probably been in management about 5 years when someone first introduced me to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when I went through it, I was just fascinated because I started to see patterns, and it really interests me. So let's just walk through it because it's useful. First, what Maslow talked about what it is we need in order to not only deliver at work, but be satisfied within our lives, okay? And he talked about physiological needs first, air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and a partner, right? So that's basic fundamentals, physiological needs. Second, then, once those physiological needs are met, we move on to what we call safety needs. So personal security, having employment and a regular, income, having access to resources, being healthy, and then you might start to think about, somewhere to live, property, that kind of thing. Third then becomes relationship, and they call it loving and belonging needs. So friendship, co-workers and colleagues, some form of intimacy, close family connections within your community, that kind of thing. And once those love and belonging needs start to be met, then we start to think about our personal needs and what we call esteem needs. So being respected, having a level of self-esteem, we like ourselves, we're proud of ourselves, starting to think about our status and where we fit in the world amongst our peers, starting to think about recognition for what we do, starting to build a sense of personal strength and create a level of freedom for ourselves. And then finally, we start the top level of Maslow's hierarchy was self-actualization. So beyond just the fundamentals, actually a desire to become the best or the most that I can be within myself, within either my role or within my, within the world that I live in, my life, my community, that kind of thing. And what I noticed when I first learned about these needs was that sometimes I would be managing a team and trying to think about where I could get someone to perform at another level, and actually understood that sometimes people's lives go through phases, and life can be messy. Sometimes people's lives will impact their ability to be motivated and engaged in their work. And I've got a number of examples throughout my career, but sometimes people just need to get back to, actually, I don't feel safe right now, whether they've got something personally going on at home or there's something going on in their career, or they're worried about their job. When people drop back down to this level of safety needs, trying to get them to become the best they can be is really difficult, because all they're thinking about is dropping right back down to this level of safety. And I always love the story. I don't know if you've heard I don't know if anybody's read the book by a guy called Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. But I read this article where they talked about Viktor Frankl and Abraham Maslow had this meeting, met each other. And Abraham Maslow, having read Viktor Frankl's work, so Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, is all about his survival through the Nazi concentration camps and then the development of his own psychological model called logotherapy. And once Abraham Maslow had read the book and met Viktor Frankl, he updated his hierarchy to include another level. And that extra level was what they call self-transcendence needs. So not just being the best I can become, but a desire to find meaning beyond myself and help other people in my community or in my business to become the best they can be. And that for me is the shift from individual contributor to leader. So we really think about where that fits with our role as leaders in a business. But if we think about trust, where trust fits for us and for our teams really is this, it's kind of belonging, relationships, connection. If our team don't feel like they have a connection with us, they don't feel like they can trust, you or us, then trying to get people to develop self-esteem, trying to get them to become the best they can be, trying to get them to deliver beyond their role within your business, be part of a team and something bigger, it's really difficult if they don't trust you as a leader. So we have to get really back down to some of these fundamentals in order to get to that next level of performance. And instead of talking about these 5 key responsibilities, I'll link these to what we can do as leaders to get some of these foundations in place. So I always think about 5 key responsibilities of leadership, and you won't be surprised trust is going to come up here. But before trust, the first key responsibility of leadership, as I've seen it throughout my career, is number 1 is to create what we call psychological safety. And psychological safety is about giving people the confidence that within your business, they can speak up, they have an opinion that matters, and that opinion will be listened to. It doesn't always have to be taken on board, but they will be heard, listened to, and feel as if their opinion is valued, even if that opinion isn't taken on board and changes aren't made as a result. As long as they have this sense that I can speak out, it's encouraged, and that I will be listened to. That's so important, because without that first fundamental, trust can't be formed. So psychological safety is probably more important for some people in certain roles than even thinking about physical safety. But the way the mind works, because we very often, think back to whether it's childhood experiences or issues that we might have had during school, where sometimes you might have felt embarrassed or a little bit vulnerable. Psychological safety for most people, if we don't establish psychological safety, it can feel as threatening to a person as physical safety. So investing time creating a level of psychological safety within your team is really valuable for them and for you as a leader. And for some people, as linking back to Maslow's hierarchy, for some people, you might even have to re-establish psychological safety depending on what's happened. And, I had a very real experience of this I was in the corporate world of running a very big business for a large US blue chip company. And there was about 3 years before I left the organization, we had a complete change of senior leadership. And one of the senior leaders that came in it could only be described as a bully. And within 6 months, everybody in his leadership team was worried about what to say in front of it. It's a bit like Donald Trump. You look at Donald Trump and the people that are around him right now, everybody's scared to tell. It's a bit like the emperor's new clothes. Everyone's scared to tell him he's naked, but he just keeps railroading and pushing and bullying. And what he's done is he's destroyed psychological safety around him. And I've seen this play out in organizations. And without that psychological safety, you'll find that trust just erodes and disappears. So first step, psychological safety. Second thing we need to do, once we've got psychological safety in place, then we need to start to work on trust. How do we create trust with our teams? There's lots of things we can do to build trust, listening to people, getting to know them personally, understanding, what are their motivations for work, what's their experience so far, where do they want to be long term. All of those things start to build trust, and making sure that we do that in a way that is non-judgmental, because everybody has different ideals, everyone has different motivations, and recognizing actually that when we're discovering that from our teams, that's really personal to them. And when they share it with us, actually, acknowledging and affirming people for what they are currently thinking is a really positive thing. Doesn't mean that we won't help them change that in the future if we see potential. But for now, actually, it's about affirming people. When we affirm people, we build a relationship of trust. But we might find that with certain people, depending on their previous experiences, that might take a little more work than with others. So building a relationship of trust is second after psychological safety. Then the third thing that I find this really often when I go into businesses is there's this gap around the clarity of expectations and goals. And what that means is people normally will join organizations and they get a job description. You come in to do this work. And then when they kind of go to start the work and start, performing in their role, there's this gap or fuzziness or grayness around what do they do on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, month-by-month basis to deliver at the highest level possible. And most people can't describe it. And the reason they can't describe it is because it's not documented. And what that creates is a gap in the clarity of what's expected of them to perform at the highest level. And the thing about us as managers and leaders is the reason we're leaders and managers is because we were high performers. And so then this gap between we know what to do, but we're not always clear on how to explain to someone else how they can do the same, creates this gap in the clarity of expectations and goals. And actually spending time slowing down, talking to your teams one-to-one about what does great performance look like, how do they get clear on what the right expectations and goals for them are, and how they deliver on those goals through a series of conversations. This doesn't happen in the first sweep. Through a series of conversations, builds a huge amount of trust, reinforces psychological safety, but most importantly, becomes one of your key responsibilities of leadership. And clarity of expectations. If you look at, there's some work done by Gallup, the polling company, the number one indicator of an engaged employee, the number one thing that engaged employees say is, I am clear of what's expected of me in the business. And if we get clarity of expectations right, engagement spikes. So it's number 3 here, but in terms of engagement, it's probably the number one thing. But you can only have this, can only help people get clear on expectations if they trust you and if they feel psychologically safe to have the conversation where you might be challenging expectations. So that's why it's number 3 in our key responsibilities list. And then fourth is, as a manager and a leader, is about helping people to generate and inspire them with the right level of energy, the right level of motivation, and the right level of engagement. And this is very often about those conversations. What energizes that person? What motivates them? What engages them in their work? What are they trying to deliver? And sharing that for yourself as a leader as well, because very often, we know that energy is contagious. The positivity we bring to a conversation, the way we show up, is very often will infiltrate around the people that we lead, and the manager and the leader's influence on team culture, team positivity is greater than any other person within the team. So actually think about it as a key responsibility of leadership to bring a positive level of energy, a positive level of motivation, and be fully engaged yourself in your role is really important, because then you lead by example. And if you don't realize it, then very often you can find yourself running on default, and that may not always be the right role modeling for your teams. And you'll see on the right hand side, you've got this, you are being watched. Something I learned a little while after I'd started a leadership course was that whenever we're in positions of leadership, people don't do what we say, they do what we do. They're continually watching us. They're observing how does Justin operate? He tells me to do this. Is he doing that? He talks about a coaching style. Does he coach? And all of those things start to create either resonance or dissonance with our team. So we really have to recognize the importance of living these responsibilities and demonstrating what we want from other people for ourselves. And then finally, the fifth key responsibility, once these first 4 pillars are in place, the fifth key responsibility of leadership is around growth and development. And what I mean by that is not just focusing on, okay, are people performing? Are they delivering? That's really important, because that's what delivers the here and now and the short-term goals. But actually what strengthens an organization is the way in which people continually develop and improve themselves within the business. So you can start to build a succession plan. You can start to think about, what does the future for the business look like? If you're growing and developing your people, then that becomes much easier. You get that clearer view on what does the long term look like. And when we're busy in our leadership roles, actually the first thing that drops off are growth and development plans. And if you ask anybody, it's interesting. I'll introduce you to a tool that we use called our Coaching Leaders Scorecard. There's a question in there about growth and development, and I think the statement reads something like, I never have time for my own development. Something else always gets in the way. And I measure the responses for all those different questions. And that question has something like an 82% agree or strongly agree answer. Most people, 82% of people, find they put off their own growth and development because they just don't have time. There's something else always getting in the way. And we have to find a way as leaders to prioritize regular conversations with our teams about growth and development, and of course, regularly prioritize time for yourself to grow and develop. And I would say this is a classic example. This is an hour out of your month where you are prioritizing your growth and development. So congratulations to you. We should have 1,000 people here, really, but there you go. So there are 5 lists, 5 things on the list for the key responsibilities of leadership. I'll send you this document after today's call. I use this at the start of a lot of our programs. This is kind of the foundations. Let's get the foundations right. Let's start to think about where you are with your team in these 5 key areas. And what I recommend people do is just go through a team review, and they just map out the names of their team. So you can see I've done 3 here as an example. And then you map out, right, where is this person? There's a ranking of 1 to 10, 1 being poor, 10 being really, really, the best possible example. So you go, where on psychological safety, where do I believe my relationship with, JL is? Okay, so it's an 8. So I think JL feels a level of psychological safety that's an 8. KP, for example, is probably more like a 6. DC would be a 9. Sort of suddenly starts, okay, there is a difference between how I see these people interact. And, to Himesh's point around how do I get people to speak up in a group, actually starting to work through this as a way to assess, actually, where are people? Is it about them, or is it about me, or is it about the relationship and how they're feeling? Then we start to think about trust. How much do they trust? And you can look at this through a couple of lenses. How much do they trust you as a leader or manager? And then how much do they trust the environment they're in? So you start to think about it in a couple of different ways. Then start to think about clarity of goals and expectations. How clear is this person on what's expected of them and what high performance looks like, and how well have we documented that and reviewed it? So you'll see that there's some variation in this list here. Then you'd go energy, motivation, and engagement. How much have I spent time and invested time energizing, motivating, engaging this person? What's their level like? So we start to look at scores there. Then we look at growth and development. And that really is how much time are we investing in conversations about growth and development. And there's a final one here. We haven't covered it today, but it kind of links to trust. And I call it the emotional bank account. And that is the level at which I feel I've invested time, invested energy in this person, so that it feels like, from an emotional bank account perspective, the account I have with them, where are we? Have I invested sufficiently so that I feel that there's strength in our relationship? And it's kind of a relationship score, really. So that's emotional bank account 9, 7, and 10, you can see. And then on the right-hand side here, you've got, okay, what action do I need to take as a result of these scores? And you'll see the slightly different actions based on what those scores are telling you. So that's an example of how it can be used. And I will send you a document that will have 2 tabs. So you'll have a team review example tab, and it'll have a team review blank tab. So if you want to map this out for your own team and start to develop your own plan around these 5 elements, these 5 key responsibilities of leadership, it gives you a format with which to do that. Okay, final thing, and then I'm going to open up a couple of breakout rooms. Final thing I want to talk about, all of this is a precursor to coaching. So these things, we get these leadership fundamentals in place, and it becomes the enabler for much more beneficial and effective coaching conversations. Now, coaching, I'm sure you know about coaching, it's question-led approach to leading. Actually, when I think about leadership, I think about a broader approach. So coaching, you can see in this model here, sits in this one segment where we call it coach for change. But the broader perspective of coaching is to make sure that you've got trust and relationships in place, our 5 key responsibilities. We have a plan that we're working on so we can articulate where the business is going and how that team member fits in with that plan. We have what we call a contract in place. So we've contracted with everybody one-to-one to set standards, agree ideal ways of working, talk about values and culture so that we agree how that works with us and each member of the team. We have objectives and goals in place that are agreed. So that person has signed up to, this is what I'm working on. This is what great performance looks like for me. And I can articulate it, and it's documented. Then we have what we call action and observation, which is the ability for us as managers and leaders to spend time with our teams, to see them operating, see what happens, when they're in front of their own teams or in front of their own customers, and creating that space where we can just observe how they're performing, because we can then give them positive praise or feedback, or alternatively, we go to coaching for changes that will improve their performance. And then the final stage is about heroes in the making. That's about development planning, creating a structure around how we help people to really formally document what they want to achieve longer term in the business. And it links to succession planning and how you then more effectively lead and manage an entire organization. And that becomes a cycle that we go through on a regular basis. So that I want to share that as a broader kind of thinking piece for today's session as well. Okay. I've definitely talked for long enough. Hope you found that useful. So lots of ideas there that you could work on. I'm going to open up a couple of breakout rooms and just give you the chance to do a couple of things. One is to meet people on the call today, and the other is to talk about, for you, what were some of your key takeaways today? What were some of the things that you think are going to be most useful for you, and things that you might want to do differently as a result of today's session? Okay, so I'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes, because I think 10's too long, 5 won't be long enough. 7 or 8 minutes. We'll come back just after 1:45, take some feedback from both your groups, and then we will wrap up and close by 5:02. Okay, so you should all get a link in front of you to open up to join the meeting room. Enjoy your conversations. I'll see you back here shortly. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. If you weren't expecting Zoom to bring you back to the meeting room, it's quite a shock, isn't it? It just does it. There's no warning. You just, hold on, I was talking and now I'm gone. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your conversations. I'd love to hear some feedback from your groups. You were in a couple of rooms. The first room was Andy, Fiona, Lauren and Paul. Who'd like to share some themes from your discussion?
I'm happy to share if everyone's happy with that in our little team.
Thanks, Fiona.
So, yeah, a wide range of people from across the country. We're here today, and we've enjoyed what you have been saying, or reiterating in my case, but that reconnection with the team and making sure that the team, where you are with your team, and just learning those management skills to build that trust. And then looking at the more formal element of coaching as well, and considering that as well.
Yeah.
Anything else, my team, you can add?
Well, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
That's good.
You get thumbs up, Fiona. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So back to the fundamentals, building trust, and then the strategic kind of coaching as well, and remembering to do that as a leader. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thanks, Fiona. Group 2 was Chris, Eleanor and Christina. Who'd like to share some thoughts from your group?
Go on, Chris, you took the lead on that.
You can if you want. I did the countdown because I knew the seconds were coming.
Well done, Chris.
I guess we were, talking about, because of my perspective, I was looking at it from a inverted commas bottom up point of view, and what I can to help leadership, to help me. Chris was talking about, the fact that their business has written fairly comprehensive playbooks. And we talked about the absolute, if you like, it's imperative that playbooks exist for all kinds of reasons, and I think it's fundamental. And Chris was saying that there's also a place to go if you're not performing, and I think trust comes into that too, because if you feel like you are performing and you're trying to overperform and you're not able to and the playbooks are fine for consistency and so on and so forth, but you need to go to an order of magnitude further to get to to outperform, as it were.
Yeah.
Playbooks obviously don't help, so you need the freedom to do that. And then sorry, I've lost Eleanor. Thank you. I've dropped off the. Was talking about the fact that it's the easy trap to fall into when sometimes managers can take too much on themselves, and we were kicking up around that kind of challenge as well, which can happen to all of us.
Yeah.
Like not being able, not just at that particular moment. We haven't climbed up the tree to have a look around. Still kind of in the woods.
It's a good analogy, that. Yeah, it's a good analogy. That lifting yourself out of the day to day is so tempting to just, because the thing is, when you feel busy, it feels like you're productive, but busy and productive are two completely different things. And tactical and strategic are two completely different things. And you have to make time for busy work, productive work, strategic work, and some of the tactical stuff that goes along with it, because you have to do both as a manager and a leader in a business. Yeah, but it's being aware.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything to that, Ellen, or did I capture that okay?
Oh, perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Huge subject, and we could have talked for an hour on it, I suppose, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's working out what are the key takeaways. But it sounds like you've got some good key takeaways across both groups. Thank you, and thanks for indulging in the conversations and really getting into it. That's great. There's a couple of things I want to do before we finish off, if that's all right. Before we do that, any final comments from anyone? Anything that you thought was useful in your breakout discussions that hasn't been raised? No, all good. Good. Just a sense check, because there's always three kind of elements of learning in these sessions. There's the content, there's the discussion, and there's the feedback from other people's discussion. You've got three elements of learning that really can be really valuable. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Let me just share a couple of things. One is a resource that we've got. You might have taken this already. If you've taken it already, hopefully you found it useful. But we've got this resource called the Coaching Leaders Scorecard. And the whole idea of the scorecard is, I use it for the start of our programs, is to give you an opportunity to kind of test yourself against a series of different statements. And that's really going to help you to start to think about your leadership approach, especially related to coaching as a leader. And it's 46 assessment statements. You answer them honestly. And at the end, you then get an email PDF report to your inbox that will give you these different scores and some pointers around where you can improve your leadership development. So I'll share that Coaching Leaders. Let me just put it in the chat. That's the scorecard link. If you'd like to take it, feel free. If you want to share it with other managers in your business, feel free to share it. I get a lot of good feedback from people who just say, I took the scorecard, it was really enlightening. So feel free to do that. Second thing is to think about, what does it take to become a successful leader? And I kind of discovered this a bit too late in my leadership career, but I got there in the end. And that is, as leaders, we need to have places where we can have confidential conversations. We need to know there's an environment where, as leaders, you can be trusted, where you can talk about things that are personal and professional to you. And sometimes that's really difficult to do in your own organization. Second thing you need is a community. We all need a community of people that are going through the same things as us, where we realize we're not on our own. This isn't isolated to me. This isn't personal. Really important we have that community. Third is that we have opportunities to collaborate, share ideas, gain new insights, understand what's working for someone else. Could it work in my business? Fourth is someone to challenge, or some people to challenge our current thinking. And that sounds obvious, but there's some interesting statistics around the way the mind works. The mind likes repetition and pattern behavior. So what we do is we find ourselves that most people will repeat the same behaviors 90% of the time. So we're continually replaying the same ideas, the same approaches, the same ways of working. And actually, to challenge those assumptions can be really valuable, because it shifts us on a different path. And then finally, a commitment to take action, commitment to make those changes actually stick and embed. And it took me a while to figure out these were the 5 things you need. But once you get these in place, they really do make a difference to how you operate as a leader, and that we intentionally bake these into the programs that we run, so that these 5 elements are like overtly covered as part of the program. And we have a program called Coaching Leaders. I won't talk too much about that today. If anyone is interested, we are building our September cohort now. So if you'd like any information about that, if you'd like to talk to me about that, feel free to drop me an email. If you would like a one-to-one discovery session, I put that link in there next to the leadership, the coaching leaders link as well. So if you'd like to book a one-to-one 45-minute discovery session to talk about anything we covered today, or if there's something else on your mind and you think I might be able to help, feel free to book into my calendar. That will let you see, I think, the next couple of weeks, and then you can book time if you would like to do that. So that is everything I wanted to cover today. A huge thanks for joining us for this lunchtime session. If you have any other questions, or if there's anything you want to cover with me before we close, feel free to stick around. I'll stay on the call if anybody does have any questions or comments. One final thing before we close: can we take a quick selfie for LinkedIn? Is everyone up for a selfie from LinkedIn? So if you want, I think most of you on camera. If anybody isn't on camera and you can come on camera, that would be great.
It won't work.
I'm going to. Oh, brilliant! Thank you. I'm going to give you a 3-second countdown so that you can put your best game face on. So on 1, I'm going to take the picture. Ready? So 3, 2, 1. And that looks absolutely marvelous. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Got it. So you should be able to see it. I'll put it on LinkedIn. I'll tag you in the post as well. I probably won't get to it today. It'll go out tomorrow. So thanks all so much. So if you need to run, feel free to run. If you've got a question or you want to hang around for a couple of minutes, I'll stay on. But otherwise, don't feel obliged. If you'd like to go, feel free to do so, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Justin.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Great to
Bye.
see you. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank
See
you.
you.
I might have a question.
No problem at all, Andy. Go on. Shoot.
Well, I've been privileged enough to see some more of your previous presentations, which is why I keep coming back.
Excellent. Oh, thanks, Andy. That's very kind of you to say so.
And it's got to the point where I have literally stopped micromanaging, and my team are just floating, like they're just gliding, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can't big them up enough. But
and
then,
is that because of the work you've been doing, Andy? Right, it's the work you've been doing to help them, support them to get to that level.
yeah, but now what do I do?
What when you say what do you do you mean
What's my next challenge?
Okay.
I mean, I love them.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
yeah. Well, you tell me, Andy, what you're a bright guy, right? You've got your team performing at the right level, you've got everything stabilized in the business. Now something else needs to shift. What needs to shift?
Probably me, which won't be good for the business.
Yeah. Well, what's the other? What else is there? I mean, I guess the other question is, what else? What's the next level of performance gap that you could be completing and filling for yourself?
That's the kind of thing.
Yeah. Go
on. I'm really not sure if that makes sense. Everything you've coached so far,
yeah,
it's all happening. Everyone's happy. Maybe I should book one of your sessions rather than keep you now.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a longer conversation.
Yes.
There's some things that you. There's some things that you probably, if you had a bit of quality time just to focus on that, right? Actually, everything's performing exactly how I want. What's the next level? That's a coaching conversation. What's the next level for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Have a look at my link, Andy. Schedule some time.
I will.
I'll happily talk you through it, and we'll definitely come up with some ideas.
Thank you.
Pleasure. And thanks for the compliments, Andy. I appreciate you continuing to join the sessions, and I'm really glad you get a lot from it.
This is actually my day off, but I still sent the links so I could do it at home. That good.
Awesome.
There you go.
Well, I'm pleased you did, Andy, and thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Pleasure. I'll see you when you book in.
Yeah, I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Andy. Enjoy the rest of your day off.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, Andy. You too. See you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.